Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving deep into one of the most famous and frankly, most misunderstood stories in the Bible, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. For centuries, this narrative has been held up as a straightforward tale about divine punishment for a specific type of sin. But what if I told you there's much more to the story? What if the real reason is more complex, more profound, and holds a mirror up to societies, both ancient and modern? Let's start by revisiting the story itself, found in the book of Genesis, chapters 18 and 19. Two angels, disguised as men, arrive in the city of Sodom. Lot, Abraham's nephew, shows them hospitality, urging them to stay in his home for safety. But soon, the men of the city, both young and old, from every part of Sodom, surround Lot's house. They demand that he bring out his guests so they can know them. This is often the central point of focus, and while it's a critical part of the narrative, it's not the whole picture. To truly understand what's happening, we need to look beyond this one scene. The Bible itself gives us more clues. Let's jump to the book of the prophet Ezekiel, chapter 16, verse 49. Listen closely to this. Now this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and needy. Did you catch that? Arrogance, being overfed, being unconcerned, and, most explicitly, not helping the poor and needy. Ezekiel, a major prophet speaking under divine inspiration, pinpoints the core sin of Sodom not as one specific act, but as a systemic societal sickness. It was a culture of extreme selfishness, a complete breakdown of social responsibility, and a cruel indifference to the vulnerable. Think about what this means. Sodom was a place of abundance, a well-watered plain, described as being like the garden of the Lord. They had plenty. They were overfed. Yet, in the midst of this prosperity, they actively withheld help from those who were struggling. Their wealth didn't lead to generosity. It led to arrogance and a hardened heart. They saw the poor and needy not as fellow human beings to be helped, but as annoyances to be ignored or, worse, exploited. Now let's go back to that terrifying scene at Lot's door in Genesis 19. The demand of the men of Sodom wasn't just a random act of evil. It was the ultimate expression of their corrupt society. The laws of hospitality were sacred in the ancient Near East. A host was duty-bound to protect their guests at all costs. For the men of the city to not only disregard this sacred duty, but to collectively demand to violate guests under a host's protection was an attack on the very fabric of social order and human decency. It was an act of extreme inhospitality, a violent assertion of power against vulnerable strangers. This wasn't just about desire. It was about domination, cruelty, and a complete lack of empathy. It was the horrific culmination of a society that had already abandoned its duty to care for the stranger, the poor, and the needy. Their actions that night were the symptom. The disease was the deep-seated societal rot that Ezekiel described. Jesus himself references Sodom, and it's fascinating to see in what context. In Matthew chapter 10, when sending out his disciples, he tells them that if any town rejects them and refuses to listen to their message, it will be more bearable for Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment than for that town. Here, Jesus links the sin of Sodom to inhospitality, the act of rejecting messengers and refusing to welcome them. He frames their failure in terms of social and spiritual rejection, reinforcing the idea that their sin was broader than a single act. So why does this matter to us today? Because this rereading of the Sodom story shifts the focus from judging specific individual behaviors to examining the health of our own societies. It asks us to look around and question, are we a hospitable people? Do we care for the poor and the needy in our midst? When we see strangers or those who are vulnerable, is our first instinct to help and protect, or to turn away in unconcerned arrogance? The story of Sodom isn't just an ancient tale of fire and brimstone. It's a timeless warning against the dangers of a society that becomes so self-absorbed, so wealthy and overfed, that it loses its compassion. It's a caution against the kind of systemic injustice where the powerful prey on the weak, and the community fails to protect the vulnerable stranger. The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah that reached God, as mentioned in Genesis 18, wasn't just about one thing. It was the cumulative cry of the oppressed, the neglected, and the abused. The real tragedy of Sodom was that it had every opportunity to be a beacon of generosity and life, like the garden it resembled. Instead, it became a symbol of selfishness and death. The city was judged not just for what it did, but for what it failed to do. It failed the basic test of humanity, to love your neighbor and to care for the stranger. When we look at it this way, the story becomes incredibly relevant. It challenges us to build communities and nations founded on empathy, justice, and active concern for the least among us. It reminds us that true righteousness isn't just about avoiding certain sins. It's about actively pursuing justice, showing mercy, and walking humbly. The destruction of Sodom serves as a stark reminder that a society that abandons the poor, rejects the stranger, and thrives on arrogance and selfishness is fundamentally broken and stands on shaky ground. It's a powerful and challenging message, one that invites deep self-reflection, not just for us as individuals, but for our communities and our world. Thank you so much for joining me for this deep dive. I hope this perspective gives you something new to think about. What are your thoughts on this interpretation? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this video insightful, please give it a like and consider subscribing for more content that explores these fascinating topics. We'll see you in the next one.